The history of Britain was largely defined by the fact that it's an island, with the English Channel and the North Sea acting as natural barriers. The Anglo-Saxons came and settled by sea, and the Norman conquest didn't just create an extension of France, but an independent kingdom. Britain's island geography helped it avoid the fate of continental Europe during major conflicts, allowing it to grow into a global empire. But what if Britain wasn't an island? As I covered in a previous video, 12,000 years ago, during the late stages of the last glacial maximum, Europe looked very different. What is now the North Sea and English Channel was a vast landscape of rivers, hills, and forests. Britain was just one portion of a great landmass connected to the rest of Europe. Here, Ice Age megafauna and Stone Age hunter-gatherers made a living for thousands of years. But as temperatures rose, so did sea levels, drowning coastlines and eroding what remained of the ancient landmass. But say we go back 12,000 years and just raise the crust of the North Sea by 50 meters or so, there's just magically more isostatic rebound as the glaciers melt. As opposed to other Doggerland scenarios, like the one done by Alternate History Hub, this smaller landmass has a more modest effect. Doggerland would be a mostly flat landmass with rolling hills and forests, similar to northern Germany, but it does prevent the moderating effects of the Gulf Stream from reaching quite as far inland. This expands Central Europe's continental climate westward. So the climate of England, northern France, and the Low Countries becomes more like Germany. The climate of Denmark and Germany becomes more like southern Sweden and Poland. Average temperatures are similar, but with bigger swings, warmer summers and colder winters. The Rhine becomes a much larger river system, with the Thames and Seine merging into it as tributaries. The outlet from the Baltic to the open ocean becomes very narrow, to a point where it is debatable what it even is. You could almost call it a river, but it is sort of also an extension of the ocean. The southern Baltic would be a brackish transition zone from freshwater to saltwater, so I call it the Baltic Channel. The Baltic Sea itself also ends up in a grey area. It's almost entirely enclosed, and with a much narrower outlet. The northern half would be freshwater, with a gradual transition zone towards saltwater much further south than in real life. This means the Baltic Sea is more of a lake than in real life, and it also means much more of it freezes over during winter.
I've got some big news for everyone who enjoys my content and map making. The official Neatling maps used in my videos are now available for purchase through the new Cartographer membership tier. If you sign up, you'll get access to a folder with my maps in full resolution. You can even join, download everything, and cancel after a week if you just want the one-time purchase. But if you stick around, I'll keep updating my maps and adding new ones over time, like my recent maps of a habitable Mars. Cartographer members, of course, also get all the supporter and patron-level perks, like early access to videos, mentions at the end of videos, and updates on my upcoming projects. Making a small channel like this one sustainable as a job is honestly very tough, especially when we don't have a sponsor. So if you have the means and want more content like this, please consider joining. Any support really makes a difference.
Doggerland's early demographic history would be very similar to real life. The original hunter-gatherer population of Western Europe would settle there, and when Doggerland doesn't sink, they continue to live there. In 6000 BCE, Neolithic farmers make their way into Europe from the Middle East, intermixing with the locals and introducing agriculture. 3000 years later, when Indo-European pastoralists migrate from the steppe into Europe, is when the timeline begins to diverge. They reach Doggerland just as they did Britain, establish the Bell-Beaker culture. But with the different geography and climate of the region, how these groups and languages develop begins to differ. In real life, by the time Rome began conquering the Italian peninsula, the broad linguistic groups of Europe looked something like this. But in our alternate timeline, they look like this. As we enter written history, cultures shift and the Germanic peoples still expand south, but the Celts retain a much stronger presence. And with the climate of Eastern Europe extending further west, the Slavic culture extends a little further. The Baltic peoples become a more prominent group. With Britain being an extension of Gaul, it is much more developed earlier on. The fertile river valley also makes the region richer, allowing for larger and more powerful states to form. This greatly alters the Gallic Wars. Gaul and Britain are no longer two manageable conquests that offer natural borders, but a vast landmass that extends much further. In real life, and in this timeline, the Gallic Wars started as Julius Caesar's prestige project. He wanted to secure the Roman Republic's northern frontier and conquer Gaul, all to fuel his political career and his ambition of centralizing power and becoming dictator back in Rome. But this didn't go unopposed by the Gauls. By 52 BCE, Vercingetorix managed to unite dozens of tribes into a pan-Gallic coalition, aiming to drive Caesar out and preserve their independence. The Gauls put up a serious fight, but Caesar was a brilliant strategist and commander. Despite being outnumbered, he defeated the Gauls at the Battle of Alesia, forcing Vercingetorix to surrender. This still happens in our alternate timeline, but unlike in real life, it's far from the end. The Britons are more developed and far better able to assist the rest of Gaul, and there are the powerful river valley tribes, essentially a whole additional Gaul's worth of Celts still resisting Rome and offering refuge to fleeing Gauls. This draws out the conflict. Caesar still gets his win, but in his time, the Roman frontier settles further south on the Seine. Later emperors eventually secured the Rhine, but trying to conquer all of the Celtic world would become an endless land war, the same trap Rome faced in Germania in real life. So Celtic civilization is not snuffed out in the same way it was in the real world. Gaul becomes a much less secure frontier for Rome, as the Celts beyond the Rhine become a continuous thorn in their side. During the crisis of the 3rd century, when the empire was split in 3 due to internal squabbles and civil war, Rome doesn't just face incursions by Germanic tribes, but also by Celtic tribes. The breakaway empire in Gaul completely collapses. This first collapse and influx of settlers puts Western Rome on a trajectory it cannot recover from. Gaul and Hispania fall completely out of Roman control almost 2 centuries earlier than in real life. On the other hand, this gives the rest of the empire a better shot at surviving, as it contracts to a more defensible position much earlier. There isn't a permanent east-west split. Instead, Constantinople becomes the center of a surviving, smaller but unified Roman Empire. The medieval age effectively begins 200 years early, but it is a very different medieval age, kick-started primarily by Celtic kingdoms and tribes establishing themselves in Gaul and Hispania, and later accelerated by Germanic migrations. Much like the Franks picked up the mantle of Rome in the west, so does the Gallic Empire. It develops a unique Gallo-Roman culture. The Gallic Empire becomes a major rival of Rome. The Roman Church doesn't have the same schism. The Pope remains just one of several patriarchs, but the Church of the Gallic Empire breaks away due to theological differences and this political rivalry, forming the Cairenic Church, headed by the Patriarch of Cairanos, the empire's capital and largest city. The less strict Cairenic Church becomes more appealing to the yet-to-be Christianized Celtic and Germanic populations of Western and Northern Europe. Rome expands its influence through the Roman Orthodox Church in Eastern Europe, and the Gallic Empire through the Cairenic Church in the West. The Gallic Empire eventually splinters due to succession crises and Germanic tribes carving out new kingdoms, but Cairanos remains at the heart of Western European civilization, completely reshaping the history of the continent. Rome's decline, much like the Byzantines in real life, is gradual and takes centuries. The rest of medieval European history has many of the same trends as in real life, but the borders and states that develop are very different. As something resembling nation-states begin to develop, Gallic and Roman civilization have various successor states that try to leave their mark. Germanic, Slavic, and much more prominent Baltic civilizations carve out kingdoms and empires. There are countless wars reminiscent of those of the real world. Doggerland in Britain, or Gallia, would more than likely be home to a major world power. It has all the right conditions for a superpower. Temperate climate, arable land, and a major navigable river running right through the middle of it. In my alternate world, it is a hybrid Celtic-Roman culture and society, with its language Gallic being Celtic-based with Latin influence. Its closest real-world equivalent perhaps being Breton, a Celtic language which similarly has seen Latin influence through French. The Poles became hegemons of Central Europe. The German identity developed in Scandinavia, and Roman civilization survived in the form of its successor states in Spain and Italy. In this alternate world, European colonization of the Americas was inevitable, at least to some extent, as exposure to Old World diseases would wipe out a significant portion of the native population no matter what, making settler colonies a lucrative venture for growing European states. But these alternate states would most likely have different approaches to colonization than the English and later Americans of the real world. The English model for colonization was based on their Irish plantation system. They sent whole communities overseas to recreate English society, with little interest in integrating natives. This meant native peoples were generally displaced or eliminated instead of intermixing with the settlers and incorporating into society. This was not the norm. Spain built an empire in a more classical sense. The conquests were brutal, but the conquered peoples were converted, taxed, and incorporated into society. In many cases, they make up half or more of the ancestry of the modern Latin Americans, so it is very unlikely we get something exactly like the US or Canada, and the almost complete erasure of native peoples, especially in the eastern United States. Gallic, Spanish, or Germanic colonies would most likely resemble Latin America a little more. Diverse societies where Algonquin peoples, the Iroquois, Cherokee, Choctaw, and others survive in a greater capacity, much like how half of Mexican ancestry is native even today, and Nahuatl and Mayan traditions and culture survive to a greater extent in modern Mexican and Central American culture, even if they're majority Spanish-speaking Catholics. Broadly, the world order we know would not exist without the massive impact of Anglo civilization. From the British Empire to the rise of the United States, their culture, language, model of colonization, and civilization building defined the world as we know it today. Without it, the world would be very alien, yet recognizable. Not better or worse, just different. But that's about all for now. A big thank you to Liam Hale, Senator John, Polanska, Harris Orbay, Willie Kins, The Blobo, Matt Past, Kaios100, Red T, and Max Walker for supporting the channel. And if you also want to be mentioned at the end of videos or get other membership perks like early access to videos and my full resolution maps, consider joining. Making a small channel like this sustainable as a job is honestly very tough, especially when there aren't sponsors. So if you have the means and want more content like this, please consider joining. Every membership really helps. Also, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe for more content like this in the future. See you next time.